Well, actually, yeah, the problem with conformity is conformity requires constraint, and constraint is constriction. And if you want high performance, then you need to be in a space of expansion, not a space of constriction, right? And so what I realize in these corporate environments is they have these problems. They sometimes don't know how to solve them, and so they throw everything at the wall to see what sticks. But as I mentioned before, I began to see the patterns that I was able to understand in myself. I've been able to see those patterns in others.
Communication is very important, but more important than only communicating, but communicating for people to comprehend what you're saying. And thankfully, today I have with me my friend Marleaux, who is excellent at communicating. He has been leading teams and companies for years, and it's all through strategic technology analysis. And I'm probably butchering some of the words of this, but the most important part is really comprehending what is being communicated. Marlo, I'm so grateful that you joined me today. I'm going to say this morning because it's morning.
It's so good to be here. I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you and really being on your show. I love your content. Um, the concept that you have around the planet of one. I mean, we are one piece of humanity, and that is what life is, right? The connections that we have. And so I'm just honored to be here.
Thank you. I'm going to start off with asking a question that I've heard you say before in our private conversations. You talk about your mind design. And I've only heard that term referred to when people are attempting to figure out how their brain basically works. So is that what you're talking about when you talk about my mind design?
Yeah. Well, I came up with the concept of mind design, at least from my own perspective. I'm pretty sure it's not a new concept, but I needed it to be something that I understood and embraced. And when I talk about mind design, I am talking about the way our minds work. And I came up with that concept because, growing up, I grew up with ADHD and dyslexia. Didn't find out until later in life, though I always suspected it. My parents knew, but ADHD back in the 70s, which is when I was diagnosed, like in 78, wasn't really well known. The problem that I encountered was that the way things were being taught, concepts were being taught, weren't in the way that I could understand. And the problem that I experienced was that I could see things, I could see patterns beyond what was being taught, but that was also treated as wrong. And so I was told that I had a learning disability, right? Or I didn't have the ability to learn. But the truth is, I was moving beyond what was being taught. And I had a teacher, I don't know if anyone mind me, I'll say her name. She passed away many years ago, but I still give great gratitude to her. Her name is Marianne Penn, and I had her for 3 years in junior high, seventh, eighth, and ninth, where I went to school. Junior high went to ninth grade, and she saw in me what my parents saw in me. And what was beautiful about that is I wasn't just, my parents weren't just trying to support me and in moving through whatever I was struggling with and finding the best of myself. But I had a teacher that partnered with them in that. And together they taught me that there was nothing wrong with me and that I had to figure out how to coexist rather than conform. So be who you are rather than what someone else wants you to be. And they helped me understand that it would be a struggle and not in me coexisting, but in me working with other people to appreciate what I'm bringing to the table. And so when we talk about mind design, I've come to understand that because I think differently, like as many other people do, with these same mind designs, there's nothing wrong with this. Our minds are just designed differently.
And did you comprehend that way back in junior high that your mind does work differently and that it's not anything negative? You comprehended that from the beginning?
You know, I would say no. I think intuitively I did. I can say with certainty that I could not conform. Like literally, I mean, I had no desire to conform. And there were so many communities that I was in but didn't belong to. And so conformity wasn't even an option for me as far as I'm concerned, you know. But it did give me the chance to do a lot more reflection. So, I do also identify as an introvert. And so I spend a lot of time in reflection and introspection and really trying to understand who I am and how I'm seeing the world and the patterns that are emerging around me. And now I've developed this way of seeing these patterns in other people, right? So as far back then, intuitively, I did, but now I consciously am aware of it. And in the coaching that I do, I help other people appreciate that as well.
I'm glad that you mentioned that you can actually see the patterns in others. How has that been helpful in all the different companies that you've been with as you develop strategic plans for teams? Because a lot of companies struggle with having cohesion in teams and a person actually existing within the company as an individual and part of a team. How have you been able to utilize some of those instincts that you have to help companies and the teams build together and understand their communication style?
Yeah. One of the things that I learned early on, and just for context, I spent most of my time in corporate America. I mean, I spent my time moving between entrepreneurship and employeeship, if I can say it that way. But one thing I've learned is that, like I said, I have a hard time conforming. I also see patterns that other people don't, in some cases can't, and in other cases won't. But I realize is organizations want high performance, but they also want conformity.
Mm.
And the problem with conformity, well, that's a whole other story. I'll stop there. But actually, yeah, the problem with conformity is conformity requires constraint, and constraint is constriction. And if you want high performance, then you need to be in a space of expansion, not a space of constriction, right? And so what I realize in these corporate environments is they have these problems. They sometimes don't know how to solve them, and so they throw everything at the wall to see what sticks. But as I mentioned before, I began to see the patterns that I was able to understand in myself. I've been able to see those patterns in others. And oftentimes we have people in these corporate spaces that don't have voice because they don't feel safe enough to share that voice. They don't share their ideas. They don't share the fact that they see paths to solutions that other people haven't explored or considered, right? Because the problem is we spend too much time conforming instead of expressing. And so what I have learned to do, A, is demonstrate what it looks like to go against the grain and produce solutions that may have been outside of other people's awareness that have the high impact. But I've also been able to find people who have that same urgency and desire, but just need an outlet. So as a leader, what I do is as I build the teams that I have the honor of building, I find people who have that perspective, who are just starving to have that voice and really just committed to having the impact. And so my job as a leader is not to control or ask them to conform. My job is to create the space for them to be themselves and then create the space for them to work cohesively, exchanging ideas, enriching each other. If you think about it, an organization is a group of people working for a common goal. But oftentimes we're not working for a common goal. We're actually working to protect ourselves, right? So in the teams that I get to build, I help them build that cohesion. The beautiful thing is, done the right way, the environment begins to see what the value of that is because they may not have experienced that before. The organization may have experienced that before. But when they see that, then they get it. And now they begin to embrace it. So it's more of a grassroots effort.
You said so many gems in that little bits of spiel, and I'm glad you went into it. I'd love to know, how did you get to this level of thinking that people, their voices are restrained And I know that's part of why you chose to also do coaching. But how did you get to the level of understanding that people aren't being heard? People are being put into their little boxes. And I know you and I have had that conversation before. How did you even comprehend that for you to become much more strategic and much more humane in the way that you actually lead?
Yeah. I think it comes just from my own experiences and recognizing the patterns of what I appreciated, what I didn't appreciate, what I liked, and what I didn't like. So, as an example, I'm not motivated by carrots or sticks. There, I said it. And and oftentimes in corporate environments, this isn't globally universally true, but it is typical where organizations will use incentives to get people to perform, or they'll use punishment to get people to perform or conform, right? But neither of those things work for me. And so the way I realized it is, as I said before, I can't conform and I won't conform. But I also know that I know how to coexist and work in cooperation. And so I think just my own level of self-awareness and realizing what works for me and what doesn't, and then seeing similar patterns in other people, and then again giving them what they need to perform, not what I want them to have. And then in terms of thinking strategically, um, so when we talk about strategy really is kind of the culmination and coordination of resources put into service to achieve a specific outcome. Oftentimes, we're trying to solve for an outcome where we don't have the capabilities, because oftentimes those capabilities that will exist in people are suppressed. And then people with my mind design, we love to create. So where there is a gap in the capability or ability to achieve something, we will always find a way. We will always find a way. So that's kind of how I was able to bring that into the environments that I'm in and into my own concepts.
Okay, let me pull back a little bit and talk about overall. I've known you for a couple of years now, and every time we are together in one of our meetings with a few of our friends and our mastermind, you always have a way of taking things that may appear complex and just bringing them down to a format that is really bite-sized, comprehensible. And I'm pulling back because you're not only in corporate America, you also have your own coaching. You have two daughters out, one in college, one still at home, and you have a wife. So the communication, the ability to connect at a really deep level is so valuable. And I see that in you in every bit and pieces. How does that how does that work so well when you pull back from corporate and you come back to everyday life with your family, with your daughters? Because you do have a very interesting background, and we'll go into that in a little bit. But how does that work so well with your family, including the challenges? Let's be real. We all have our challenges.
Yeah. Um, so I'll go back. I'll go back a little bit. So there's a few things there. So one, I try to be consistent with who I am and how I show up in all areas of my life. So who you're seeing in this moment is just simply who I am, right? And my wife and daughter experience me this way as well. They get to see more of um, the vulnerabilities that I have. One of the things that I'm committed to is I don't want my family to see me as extraordinary. I want them to see me as human, because my goal is to help them be the best parts of themselves. And I don't want them to use me as the measure. I want them to just see me as the example. Um, so in fact, so there was a time when I would, for years I've exercised. I really value health and fitness, not for vanity's sake, but just to kind of elevate my body, mind, and spirit. So I'm always showing up at my best. And that concept started with my family. So my wife said that we were going to be parents, and I was working a job where I was always tired, and I knew I had to do more in order to be a better father, friend, husband, lover, all those things, right? So I started really adopting that, but I also didn't want my family to think that I was perfect. So there was a time when my children got older, I think starting my youngest was probably like 3 or 4. I started taking them to the gym with me. And people thought I was taking them there to get them like incorporated into workouts and things, and to start having teaching them young to be fit, right? No, I wanted them to see what struggle looked like. And I
Mm.
wanted them to feel it too. So they weren't like lifting weights or anything, but they saw me struggling. They saw me failing, but they saw the strength that came as a result, right? So they get to see, and when I have a bad day, we talk about it. I share with them what I experienced, because I want them to know that a lot of times on Instagram, we see the perfect moments in people's lives, but those perfect moments are preceded by a lot of trial and pain and suffering. And they also know that there's no strength, there's no struggle, right? We talk about those things. So I know I said all that to say, my family really benefits from the concepts that I'm able to distill down from all the complexities that I experience in the world, from all the complexities I experience in my own mind, and then just the process of me trying to make it make sense to me. And I know if I can make it make sense to me, then I can make it make sense to others. Right. So my wife has this thing called Marlowisms. In fact, she recently published her first book, and in the acknowledgments, she mentions the Marlowisms, because they're really these really condensed piece of nuggets that I've been able to distill down to really just have an impact. Because my view is the voices inside of our heads are the most important voices. Those are the ones we listen to the most. So if I can distill them down into bite-sized pieces instead of long stories or, parables, then they have more impact when we need them because they're more accessible.
I love the concept of Marleauism because it definitely does exist. Even in our group, we refer to a lot of your stuff. What is your general communication within yourself? Do you pay attention a lot to that? Because I can tell you within me, and you know me enough to go, I have this roller coasters where there are days my mind is wonderful and everything is great. And there are days that I notice that within me, I am fighting within me, struggling with myself as I look at the world. You took the complexities of the world and brought them down. I look within me and go, how much of that am I creating into the world, and how can I become a better version of me, because I'm a radio station out into the world as everybody else. So how much of your struggles are still there, even though you have a TED talk coming up and you have all these wonderful things that you do, because we're talking about authenticity, so people understand we can be great in a lot of ways, but there's things that we could still be working on. So what are some of the things that you communicate within yourself that you go, I'd like to work better on that? Or maybe there isn't any.
Yeah. Um, so I'm gonna use the word, I've always struggled with the inability to quiet my mind. I have um tried meditation, which is really helpful. I can get to, if I'm doing mindfulness meditation, if I get to 3 minutes, my nose will be bleeding, but I will find peace. And it's amazing to find silence for 3 minutes. But in my mind, I'm trying to constantly explore what I'm experiencing. And I'm also trying to reflect on what I want to see in the world and who I want to be in it. Right. So things are constantly moving. Nothing is ever stopping. Sleep is very difficult. I have this thing called the witching hour, which usually occurs at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's when I have no distractions. I'm laying in bed. It's pitch black. And that's like the perfect whiteboard of opportunity to start connecting the dots. Right. But one thing that I am very, very careful of is the words and sentiment that I'm bringing into this space. So oftentimes, if I'm in the work environment, for instance, I may struggle to find certain words because I don't let certain words in my head. So I don't criticize people in my head. I don't use foul language in my head. I don't criticize myself at all, ever, right? Because there are enough people trying to bring me down on the outside. I don't need to oblige them on the inside. So I think that's a really important thing that some people can really struggle with, because a lot of what we believe about ourselves is based on the box of misunderstanding that someone else put us in, and we just adopted that box as our home. So I make sure that I stay out of the box of misunderstanding, and I remind myself of that in my head. So I hope what I'm saying makes sense.
It makes a lot of
Um,
sense.
yeah,
It makes a lot of sense because one of my struggles is to continue to work on not speaking to myself in any harmful way. And I understood that about a decade and a half ago. And it's constant reminder to myself to actually speak kinder and to see myself kinder within my own brain, because then that comes out in the way that I show up in the world. How did you portray some of that to your beautiful daughters? Because you are an incredible parent, along with your wife, Mary. How did you portray some of those things so that they can stand on their own?
yeah. I mean, as I said before, I think I live my life in demonstration to them of what it looks like to be a good person, to be an empowered person, to be a coexisting and cooperating person, and not a conforming person, right? Um, and I also this is something interesting. So when I was in high school, I worked at this retail store, and I met this lady just kind of in passing. And by the way, I used to collect all these little data points that I didn't know I was going to do anything with them. But this lady, she asked me, we're talking. She had just had a grandchild, and she was really excited. And I wasn't even near having children yet, right? I didn't have children for almost another 20 something years. But she said something important. She said, "It's so important not to say no to your children."
Mm.
And it kind of it blew me away, because I'm like, wait a minute, you just can't say yes to everything, right? But the more I reflected on it, I understood what she meant, because no is negative. And if you listen to a lot of little kids, you tell them do something, what do you hear? Oh, no, right? And so my wife and I, we did two things. One, with when our oldest was born, we actually taught her to sign, starting when she was 2 months old. And so we started teaching her to communicate very, very early on. And she started responding around 8 months, and her first sign was all done, right? And the other part is that we never said no to her. It wasn't that we didn't allow her to do things. It was, you may not do that at this moment, or you may not have that. So we were articulating our no's a bit more. And so that gave her, and this also continued to our younger daughter, that gave them the language to be able to express what they wanted rather than just shutting down. So they knew there's nuances to the no, if you will, right? So that's one of the things in terms of like the thinking in the head. And then even as they're coming into their being, and by the way, my wife and I, our commitment to them was to ensure that they had tools in their teens that people in their 40s and 50s don't even have. And so we started them teaching them these skills when it came to managing relationships with their teachers If there was a conflict, we empowered them to navigate that conflict. And then we only came in when the teacher's ego showed up in a way that was not beneficial to our daughter. Right. And so giving them the experiences, giving them the proper voice, and giving them the proper mindset. And even when people calling them names, helping them understand that their other people's opinion of them does not equate to their value, right? And that their opinion of themselves is way greater than anyone's opinion, including my own of them.
That is such a huge thing to teach kids in general. And you said it perfectly right. There are lots of individuals in their 40s and 50s and so on that still struggle with the tools to not handle the world, but handle themselves. And I'm speaking as one, or I used to be one, and I've gotten so much better at it. Like, how did you even comprehend that part, Marleaux, to go, this is something that is very important for my daughters to learn? So if I put you in front of a bunch of parents that have young kids, I'm going to say, I don't know, high schoolers or before high school, what would you say to them to really understand about how do you parent a little bit better so that the child is strong in who they are? Because you have things that your mind comes up with that I haven't heard before from a lot of people.
Thank you for sharing that. And also thank you for this question. I think it starts with self, right? I think the kind of parent that I am, the kind of parent my wife is, really started with the work that we did on ourselves, right? Because if anything's going to challenge your ego and your injuries, it's a child, right? And so it's difficult to help cultivate our children to give them the best chance of success in this world when we haven't cultivated ourselves to demonstrate what that looks like. So the work really does have to start with us. I also give a lot of credit to my parents. They both, had really challenging childhoods growing up, and of course that the challenge is relative, but their stories can be heartbreaking, knowing what I know of them. But they also really made sure that whatever their injuries were and may still exist stopped with them, and
Mm.
they made this decision way early on, right? And you heard me talk about earlier how I really strive to show up as me, and no matter where I am. My mom did something beautiful, and I recognize this wholeheartedly, is that because of her injuries, she had to be two people. She had to be my mother, and then she had to be Edna, right? And so Edna is the one with the injuries.
Mm.
Mom is the one with the lessons and the nurturing and the care. And I often tell people, my mom taught me how to be a man. My dad showed me, right? And so, really, that's why I really believe that in order to be the best parent, you also have to demonstrate how to be the best human.
What are some of the things that you worked on within yourself so that you became better before you even began the parenting? Like you comprehended this, that you needed to work on some of your stuff. And I'm asking specifically so that someone who is in their early teens, in their 20s, knows to take care of the things that are important from the beginning. And for someone who is already a parent or in their 40s or so on, to go back and go, oh, I've never taken care of it. So what are some of the things that you worked on for yourself that made you a better version of you? I'd ask you about Mary, but we'll leave Mary for Mary. We'll have a conversation with her directly.
um, yeah, yeah, that'll be interesting. And she and I are very, very, very different, which is a beautiful thing too, because I value what makes us different, not what makes us the same.
Ah,
right? But in terms of those lessons, I would say first managing my own ego.
mm,
I didn't really understand that until I had some work experiences um, that helped me realize the importance of being aware of how I feel before I speak, because I've been on the receiving end of that and I didn't like how it felt. And not only that, it wasn't constructive. And so if there's any sort of tension or friction or conflict, there's got to be a path to solution or resolution, right? And if egos show up, there is no positive outcome, right? There's just a perceived winner and a perceived loser, and then even a step back. So I've learned how to talk to bypass the ego and speak to the intellect and to the heart, because that's where we make our decisions from. We just use the ego to hide, defend, and protect.
we're very good
Uh,
at that.
and I try because, in the earlier years, like when I was a kid, I mean, I could be petty. Like I still want to hurt my feelings. I want to try to hurt yours, right? Or, if you took something from me, I want to take something from you. But again, there's no movement there. There's no creation. There's this destruction and regression, right? So I think that's probably one of the biggest ones, is just managing my ego. Again, I think all of our influence and impact starts with us, not others. Um, Another thing is, so when I was 19, 20-ish, I discovered Tony Robbins. He had personal power too, right? And I went on a limb and I bought his tapes. This is back when there was he had like the 30, you buy 30 cassette tapes and you listen to one a day, right? While I never got through all the tapes, but the importance of personal development and self-awareness, and the idea that we have the power to um, grow from our circumstance to the degree that we can actually change it. That became super powerful for me as well. Because I think too often, we're told that our success, meaning, and well-being comes from someone else, but instead it starts with us. So those are some of the early things that I really began to tie into. Particularly, again, remember, I can't conform. I can't
Thank
conform.
God you don't. I love how you put the concepts. For me, I use the word mindfulness in the sense of knowing yourself and being aware of what is happening within you and who you are and who you're becoming. So, kind of very similar to how you look at it, but from my perspective of mindfulness, just daily being aware. I love how you referred to your marriage, to your spouse, to your beautiful wife, as you love the differences, you value the differences. Would you take me down that path? Because a lot of our conflict in our world, in our communities, in marriages or otherwise, is because we don't, in general, value differences. So take me down that thinking of, why do you value the differences? What's there for you?
Yeah. Um, and this is something that goes all the way back to when I was a little boy, right? Elementary school or whatever. I was always a misfit, right? And again, misfit, that's a term that means you're an outlier, like you're outside of normal, right? And I appreciate not being normal. And but a lot of who I've been able to develop into didn't come from the homogeneity. It came from the heterogeneity. It came from my exposure to different people that saw the world the way I didn't. I wish I had readily available a picture of my fourth grade class. I grew up in a little town called Vallejo. And we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion today. Um, to me, as a kid, like, I grew up in a very diverse environment. just because of where I was. Because, Vallejo, they had Mare Island, which was a naval base. And so you had different people from different nationalities all in this one little area. And so, one of my best friends growing up, and today I call him my brother, is Guamanian. And so I was able to really get a different view of life by being a part of his family. And he got a different view by being a part of mine, you know? And so being exposed to parts of life that I'm not aware of enriched me, right? I never thought I was going to meet anyone like Marianne Penn. And, to the degree that she even put me into a special program called Gifted and Talented Education, which if I would have conformed to what people believed me to be, then I would have never had the gift that she gave me. Right. So what I found is, and I found other people inside of that program, none of them the same, none of them the same. And so I get all this richness of different perspectives and ideas and ways of being, whether I like them or not. And now I have this new way of learning. So that's why I value what makes us different than what makes us the same. Because if we're living inside of that normal curve, that means that there is no change. Everything is aligned and conformed and normal. But the change comes outside of the curve. Right? So I love the challenge of shifting the curve by exposing myself to things that are outside of it. So I hope that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. How do you work through some of the differences, even though we value differences? How do you work some of the differences between you and your spouse, or even between you and your daughters? Because every generation has their own way of thinking. How do you get to the point where you're communicating and we're both comprehending? And I'm asking you difficult questions on purpose because I know you can handle them.
Yeah, actually, these excite me, right? And I love these. And yeah, I know you asked difficult questions a lot. but again, it's those things that, like, you're helping me resolve new patterns as you're asking these questions too, right? And I love that you're bringing that out to me even in our private conversations. So I think one of the things is and for whatever reason I'm trying to like readdress that question in my head. Actually, can you ask it one more time? I want to put it back together.
I'd like to know, how do you value and work through some of the differences between you and your daughters, between you and your wife, even though we value the differences?
Yeah.
But sometimes differences can be very challenging. And I'll take it back to me. I'm at the position where I'm caretaker for my mom, who is going to be 91 very soon. Beautiful woman. We call her the general because her way of doing life is she takes charge. I'm not. I'm the person that allows things to be. I comprehend. I give space is the best way that I look at it. Yet I find myself challenged within me a lot of times, and you've heard me say these before in our private conversations, where I find it challenging because her style is to give orders, to say things. And I've learned that it has nothing to do with me at all. It has to do that I see her as the complete human being that she is, and how wonderful and grateful I am to her for who she is, because that's what created the life that we have. Because my dad was very different in his style. I'm much more similar to my dad's style. So I could see how working through some of those things within me has helped me become much more loving and much more grateful to see my mom as who she is. So that's my question to you is how do you work through some of these differences that we value, yet they are a challenge? How do you work through them?
Yeah. And thanks for that the extra dimension, especially in the relationship with your mom, because what it highlighted me too is it's interesting that people that are closer to us, the ones that we have spent the most time with, including those who have given us life, it's a different there's a different way of managing that than those who are further from that, right? So let me start from the further. As I built new relationships and as I work with others and as I influence and open to being influenced, and I welcome that, right? What I'm listening for is the intention of the other person, not necessarily the words. Too often people are expressing words and not intention, right? And that's where misunderstandings come from. So, and the other part is I'm always willing to be wrong. It's one of the important things I learned from my mom. She goes, in your relationship, it's not important for you to be right. You don't have to, you don't have to like give in and accept someone else's truth, but you have to understand that someone else has their truth. And it's not important for you to be right. And that's one of the reasons why you hear me talk about, sometimes people are competitive in their relationships. I find that competition in relationships actually is contrary to a relationship because in competition, someone has to lose in order for someone else to win. And in a relationship, the purpose of that relationship should be expansion in service of an ultimate goal. So, how do you get to the goal if you're constantly trying to trip up with the other person so that way you win rather than both people trying to be better? So, understanding the intention, being willing to be wrong, being able to take new inputs into your current belief and evaluating that and even so if let's say you are right and you get new information by being willing to be wrong, your rightness can be expanded by the new information, right? And that is also the how I develop the high performing teams as well. And so a lot of times it's creating the psychologically safe space for people to be wrong, for people to have voice, for people to be heard, right? And to listen for the intention and not the words. And so instead of saying, so here's what I hear you saying, perhaps try, here's what I think you were intending.
Mm.
Or when I misunderstood, which can be depending on the audience, I often have to go back and say, here's what I'm intending. Right. The words were, I was trying to express the intention, but here's this, just to cut through the fog, here's my intention. When it comes to those who are closer to us, it is a little bit more challenging because, as much as I resist normal, those people close to us are our normal, right? We don't know our moms any other way, right? And they don't know us any other way. In fact, I think it's probably harder for them than it is for us because my mom still calls me her baby. She still calls my older brother her baby. She still calls my younger brother her baby, right? And and on the holidays, and I'll call her today, and she'll say, "How's my baby doing?" So she will always see me this way because she has committed her life to me in that way. So when it comes to that relationship, and I've heard this from you too, really approaching a relationship from a place of gratitude, really, and again back to the intention, like what is she intending? Because my mom will say things to me from a place of love that actually triggers me, right? But then I throw myself, I know that gives her a sense of me being safe because that's what she wanted for me. She wanted me to be safe. But I'm not seeking safety. I'm seeking expansion, and I can't have the both at the same time. So I always let her know how much I appreciate her and how much I love her, and it feeds her and it feeds me, and it gives me a different lens on how I interact with her. And this is the same thing with my own children. By the way, I do give them, in our house, we have this rule. You can disagree. You don't have to agree with us, but you do have to be respectful. That's non-negotiable. So we do teach ego management in this house too. So like I said, I have to demonstrate what I expect, and it is ego management.
I love that answer so much. The way that you made a distinction between someone that is not in your daily normal routine of life versus someone that's close, a mom or spouse or children. I'd like to know what you think of in life where there comes a point where none of our communication with someone, especially that are close, is to attempt to change them in any specific way. What do you think of that concept? And I'll tell you where I came to that. I came to that as I was the caretaker for my dad and my mom, completely two different human beings. And I'd find myself sometimes rushing and frustrated to get something done. And my dad, even though he's going through dementia, in his wisdom, there are times he'd look at me and just go, like, would point at me, just like, slow down, breathe. And I was attempting to get him to do something, and my whole purpose was for me to be his caretaker, to love him, to be his daughter, to take care of him. And I got it. I'm not there to make him different. I'm not there to make him comprehend anything. I'm there to love him and facilitate whatever he's going through. So I came to the conclusion there are times in life that you definitely are not there to change anything, but to simply be. What do you think of that, even with your daughters or at work? I'm asking a broad question, but I'm asking it in a way, when do you get that you don't need to change anything? That's not your place to change something.
Ralph Waldo Emerson said, and I'll see if I can get this right. The biggest accomplishment in this world is being yourself in the world that's constantly trying to change you. And I know that firsthand. I think we all do. I think some of us are more conscious of it than others. And a lot of the decisions that I make and the relationships that I have are based on the decisions I made for me and the relationships I have with me. And I don't appreciate anyone trying to change me, right? That's conformity. And so when I'm working with someone that doesn't want change, I just accept that. And by the way, like in my own coaching practice, I actually have criteria before I work with someone. First of all, they have to want the change. Second of all, they have to be willing to make the change. And then my job is to help them find the way. And so if someone doesn't want to change, then they're not definitely not going to be willing to. And so anything that I do outside of that is a waste of energy, right? And so I differentiate between spending energy and investing energy. And so rather than spending energy, because I want to conserve it so I can invest it somewhere else, I would just accept what is for what it is, right? If the person is happy where they are, then I can support them in that moment where they are. But I can't have an expectation that I'm going to get something different than what they're willing to give, right? And I think that's where gratitude comes from because I can be grateful for that experience. I can be grateful for the person being in my life to help me have that realization. But I also know that I will bring my own self pain if I'm trying to change something that's not changeable, especially when I reflect that same way.
Let me take you to your TEDx talk that's coming up. What would you like to convey aside from the actual message? What is it that you would love for that TEDx talk to achieve for the people that are attending or the people that hear it at some point?
Yeah. It's interesting because that's one of those things that it's funny because with Ted is really about expressing ideas, right? Um, Ideas that move the world forward. So we're definitely talking about impact. And my talk basically is around what I'm calling the rise of the neurodivergent leader. And the reason why I'm speaking to this is because we're actually at this inflection point in technology and its impact on society, politics, religion. Like a lot of things are changing where we are, particularly because of what's happening with generative AI and the speed at which it's moving. I mean, I started using generative AI to help negotiate contracts about a year ago in real time, right? It was my attorney in the room when I needed it, right? But now we've got images, we've got music, we've got audio, like not only just written content, like everything is starting to shift. And we're going into the place of uncertainty, and normal doesn't like uncertainty. So the reason why I think we need neurodivergent leadership, and again, this I'll tell you, this is biased thinking for sure, but I can tell you, we like the chaos of uncertainty, and we like putting together the patterns that create something new from what's unknown. And so, what I want people to take away from that talk is that the world is changing, and we have to think differently. We have to. We have to behave differently, and we have to embrace the uncertainty as we cross over into this new realm, right? And leadership is important, not from a position, but from a mindset standpoint. Leadership is important because, in my view, courage is the number one characteristic of a leader, meaning stepping into the unknown, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, despite lack of confidence, right? But knowing that you can create something new that can create something of value from everyone else who can follow. So I think you need a different kind of leader to create a different kind of normal. And that's what I want people to walk away from that talk with.
That's really incredible. Would you elaborate on neurodiversion so that I kind of comprehend it, but I'll tell you, I don't comprehend it completely. So explain that to me a little bit.
Yeah. So the concept of neurodivergence, it actually was really developed around trying to create. It's not something I created, by the way, but it's the concept that just because someone thinks differently or their mind has developed in a way that doesn't think what's called neurotypically, right? It's the idea is to create a sense of humanity for those of us who don't fit into the normal way of being, who don't think the normal way of being, right? And it originated originally with autism, right? Because I mean, if it's autistic, there's a particular thing, the way they see the world, the way they interact with the world, and it's very different even across different people with that diagnosis, right? And then you have the autistic spectrum. So the idea is to really acknowledge that there are different ways of being, different ways of thinking, different ways of seeing, different ways of interacting, different ways of feeling, touching, and connecting that are outside of our typical way of understanding. But that doesn't mean there's something wrong, you know. And if I can add this really quickly, at the risk of creating an aside, sometimes someone might be in an interview process, and oftentimes what you'll hear is, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And I will tell you, I will never answer the weakness question, ever, and I never have. And here's why: because weakness is relative to the environment, right? So if you have an environment that is not supportive of a person who thinks differently, then the fact that they think differently is the weakness, not the value they can create, right? So that's why I think I love embracing the phrasing neurodivergent versus neurotypical. There's nothing wrong with either, but given the environment, they both have their strengths and they both have their weaknesses. But you put them together, then you get something amazing.
Thank you for explaining that, Marleaux. Honestly, because what you just explained is how my brain thinks about humanity, is that embracing all the incredible individuals that we have in this world, and however we see each other, whether we look at someone as being different or as different culture, different religion, different whatever. Those aren't differences. That's the wonderful uniqueness of our humanity for us to be so great. Otherwise, we would all be robots. So you explain it through that concept. What I think about when I'm doing a podcast, what I think about when I'm doing any of my teachings is how do I get individuals to genuinely embrace what they can't see or don't understand yet in someone else so that they can come back to gratitude because that enriches all of us. My question from that is you do a lot of teaching, you do a lot of speaking, you are in a lots of different formats from corporate to your personal coaching to being on stages. What's the best way that you have seen to reach very diverse individuals? To like have them comprehend that you're there with an intention of service, of love. And that's my question. I'm asking it selfishly as I do my podcast. Like I'm looking to reach people at the level that they can break out of their shell.
The shell, first of all, is intended to protect the seed inside, right? Um, one of the things that I've learned is that, well, at least for myself, is I don't try to belong. I just try to be. And I think that also invites people into just being instead of trying to belong. Because sometimes we can be distracted by trying to figure out how to fit in instead of just being present. And so I think, uh, again, I try to show up as me the way I am in every part of my life authentically. And I have found that people will show up in that same conversation without the armor on, without the shell, and creating that psychologically safe space that I talked about earlier for them just to be authentically themselves. And in that space, people hear more clearly and they're more open because they're not trying to hide, defend, or protect anything. And then they feel like I can be different and I can contribute, right, to this movement, to this being. And that it has to start with self, right? The change, as they say, the change we want to see in the world really starts with us. So I hope that answers your question
It
there.
answers my question, and
I love that
because
question too.
I know you, I can genuinely see how come you are so impactful in your corporate environment because you reach people at the level of being, not as a structure. Um, I see you as a leader that is I see you as a leader that can reach individuals in every part of the world at the level that they are at that moment of being. How do you see yourself as a leader, as a speaker?
Um, well, I would see myself as a human. I mean, like really, again, I think too many of us live our lives stuck in the box of someone else's misunderstanding, right? Someone else's control or constraints. And throughout the world, I mean, certainly there are different environments where it becomes that's more of a challenge than others, like here in the States, right? But my hope as a speaker and leader is to give people space to step into their own greatness and to live their lives with courage, like literally, not with confidence, but with courage, because there's more we don't know than we do. And so that's really what I'm trying to really inspire in others, and let them know that they are a part of a mosaic, and the picture isn't complete without their piece.
Of that, my social media platforms, my first words in there, human being, because what else could we be besides human being for us to
Right?
grow out of that, right?
Yeah, and
Yes,
being human.
yes, yes. Marlo, I have a few more things to ask. However, how do people connect with you? What's the best way for people to connect with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, of course, Facebook. I also am on Instagram, Marleaux F. There is another Marleaux out there. I was kind of not happy about that, but I went with it. I'm supposed to be unique.
I'll make sure to put
um,
links in our podcast too, so that they know that you're the Marlowe.
yeah, and they're welcome to check out my podcast as well, which is Boundaries Out the Box, that I do with my co-host Andy Litstone. And we talk about connecting with others, but authentically showing up as ourselves, but also trying to how do you live into yourself? The way to do that is to remove what other people have put on you and put on what you want. So I would say labels aren't bad, just the other ones that don't serve us are.
How do you, and I ask how do you make sure that you are also having joy in your life? Because a lot of the topics, sometimes when we talk about growth and personal development, sometimes they feel very heavy to someone that is struggling out there. So, how do you also have fun so that they understand that with work on ourselves also comes joy?
Yeah. It's funny. Well, I find joy just being with those I care about. And in fact, I designed my house in a way that allows me and my family to be vulnerable. So at the end of the day, no matter what we're doing out in the world, we don't need to wear armor. Like we can literally just be who we are. And I find joy in seeing my daughters um, stepping into their own greatness. I find joy in seeing them being challenged and leveraging the tools that we've given them and seeing them growing that, becoming something that I can't imagine. And I'm looking forward to every step of that. So I find joy in those things. When it comes to hobbies, I don't know. It's really weird because I don't have any hobbies, but I'm interested in everything. I guess you'd call me a polymath. I think that's what people call it. So I have a lot of different interests. So I find joy in myself when I discover something new. Right? There's like these little breakthroughs. So for me, those are joyful, and then of course gratitude. Just finding appreciation in everything that I possibly can. You know, and I've learned that after a really tough day, tough week, when it's really dark and you can't see anything, when I stop and take a breath, I do find something to be grateful for, and it typically is my wife and daughters and the support they give me, because again, remember, I don't show up as extraordinary. They know I'm human. They know I can do great things, but they know I also take punches. And then I have the honor and pleasure and just the blessing of having friends like you, right? So I find joy in those things that remind me of why I love and why I live.
Love that answer. Goes right along with what I think. The people that are around me, the people that I get to associate with and get to grow with and see life through a beautiful lens that I may not have been privileged to before. So that's a beautiful answer. How has your relationship with your parents through the years expanded, altered? Because I look at myself, I used to see my parents as my parents. And I had the privilege because I got to be their caretaker to see them as people, as human beings, as very loving couple. So I've changed. I've become a lot different, a lot better in how I view them because I have the opportunity to see them as themselves, not only as my parents. So how has yours kind of altered through the years?
Drastically. That might even be a different episode of the podcast.
I'm all for that. You know that. We can talk for hours.
uh, yeah, like I said, my mom taught me how to be a man. My dad showed me, and I often call my mom my first coach, really. And you can imagine someone with the way I live my life and the way I see myself and even the idea that I don't conform. You can imagine what kind of child that is too, you know. And so I was frustrating growing up. And by the way, I'm more like my dad than my mom.
Mhm.
And when I was a kid, my dad could be pretty hard on me. And my mom would tell me, you're just like your dad. And I would get mad. I'd get mad because I didn't want to see it. Right. And as I got older, and I remember when I was like 11 years old, and we were talking about this. And then she says, you guys probably won't have a good relationship until you're in your 20s. And I'm thinking to myself, like being at that age, that's like another lifetime away. Like, I don't want to wait till I'm an adult to have a relationship with my dad. La la la. Right. Um, and to answer your question directly, when I began to understand who I was, I began to understand my dad more. And I began to understand that there were things that I had worked out that my dad may not have. And then I realized that my dad worked out things that I still had to work out. And the other part too is, given the kind of kid that I was, and I wasn't a problem child, but I was easily misunderstood, right? Um, what I also learned was that it was important for me to be safe with my parents. They wanted me to be safe, and they couldn't understand how I was going to be successful in the world.
Mm.
And so a lot of what they tried to really, in one way, support me with, and in other ways, maybe impose on me, was all in the service of being safe. And now when they see me as I do things in the world, as far back as the last 30 years, they knew that despite the way I was putting myself out there with courage, they also knew that that came with me serving all those that came before me, including them, and really honoring them. And they knew that I could take the blows, and they knew I would still be safe. And they knew that even if I didn't feel safe out in the world, that they knew that they were still a safe place for me to go back to. And so I have also had the honor of becoming that safe space for them. Right. So for all of the struggles that I had growing up, under their guidance and support, and for all the struggles they had with me, um, I don't hold on to all the things that they tried, all the instructions they didn't have to raise three boys. And that goes for any parent. Right? There's no instruction manuals to this stuff. This is why the work starts with us first. because sometimes our egos get in the way. And so with my parents, we've been able to just speak to the heart and not to the ego. That's where we learned over time. And that's where we are today. And every time I talk to them, I always let them know how much I appreciate it, what they've given me to help me grow. Right. So, yeah, yeah. And I live every day in honor of them, and everything, all the gifts they've given me. And my job is now to expand them, to give them to the world.
It's so incredible to be in those stages of letting our parents know how much we love and appreciate everything that they've done for us, even though they may not have had everything right, who in God's name does. It's beautiful to be in that space to really see them completely. Although if I put you on a stage in front of high schoolers that are getting ready to go off to college and begin their life, what message would you say to them?
Wow. Um, Lead with courage, live with courage, be you, not who someone else wants you to be or who you think someone else wants you to be. Be authentic. And if you're in the wrong place, you're just in the wrong place. If they don't want what you're bringing, or they're not willing to get what they want with your help, then you're in the wrong place. And I get that can sound easy in this moment to say that conveniently, but I can tell you it's true. Don't be where you shouldn't be. Be where you're needed. Be where you're wanted. Be where you're appreciated, and be where you can contribute and also receive the gifts of someone else's contribution. Right? Growth through the differences, not the similarities.
And if I put you on a stage right now with people that are in their late 30s, 40s on up, that have had a few dings and dents in life, would your message be, and you did, what would your message be then?
It would probably be the same. And one of the things I have found is that, a lot of us are still growing up, right? And and some of us still growing up are actually still injured children in adult bodies. And that's okay. That's okay. Find you in you, not you in someone else's eyes in the world that wants you to be what they want you to be. And again, as we get older, that gets harder to embrace. But as we get older, it becomes more important to embrace, because now then we begin to tell ourselves a story where I'm getting old, people won't want me. I'm getting older, they're going to hire someone younger than me. What we have to realize is when we're younger, our hands are more valuable than our heads. When we're older, our heads are more valuable than our hands. We have the lessons that those who are coming behind us need to learn. So shift how you're thinking around where your value is coming from and the way you can provide that value. So that's how I would shift that.
So beautifully said. Thank you. My last question. Is there anything that you'd like to say to the audience that I may not have asked you? Because again, we could talk for hours, but is there something that you'd like to say that go, oh, Rima forgot to ask me this?
I that's your hardest question. um, I love your messaging. I love your concepts. I love your intentions. And I know that you want the world to be a better place. I know you see the conflicts, you see the division. I mean, hence the one planet, or planet of one, right? We are all connected. So I guess if I could say anything, I think it's important for us to really understand, again, the idea that the world is a mosaic, and each of us has to show up to do not only our part, but to be that piece authentically. So to the degree that we can, as we connect to others, let's understand that they will be different. They need to be different so we can change what the picture looks like. So that's I guess that's the thing that I could offer. Just be you, just be.
Thank you. I love you very much. I appreciate you. And thank you for answering my difficult questions today.
That was a beautiful conversation, and I love you. And thank you for the honor of being on your show today. It's a treat. It really is. I've been
Thank
looking for it for a long time.
Me too. Me too. To our incredible audience, please remember our attitude always determines our altitude in life. So pay attention to what you're thinking, how you're doing your life, how you're being yourself, and that will get you to the right places everywhere you need to be. And we'll see you in the next podcast. Thank you for being with us.